Hello, everyone. Hello, Mel Harrison, and hello, Lauren Ivani. Good to see you again, Lauren. It's the first recording for the year, and
Mhm.
welcome, Mel.
Yeah,
Thank
welcome,
you.
Mel.
Thank you.
Mel, would you mind introducing yourself, who you are, and what you're involved in, and then we'll talk about what we're chatting about today.
Yep, that sounds good. So my name is Mel Harrison, and I'm based in Sydney, but I am a disability consultant. So I work on a lot of disability projects across the country. And one of the projects that I do work with is with sexual health, family planning, ACT, and on the Safer Me, Safer You program, which is all around social and sexual safety of people with disability. And for me, I guess with all my roles with disability consultancy, is very much around safety of people with disability because that's often neglected, or if it's not neglected, it's often the people that don't have disability that are making the decisions and the choices for people with disability. So I'm very passionate about the voice and amplifying the voice of people with disability out there so they get to choose. And, quite frankly, sometimes they might make the wrong choice. But, like I'm here to say, like, regardless of whether you've got a disability or not, people do make wrong choices. And
We
the way
do.
that, yeah, and the way that you learn
Regularly.
is by making wrong choices. So it's important to not take that power away or that control away from people with disability. And I also have a disability myself, so I've lived with a particular syndrome for my whole life, which I only got diagnosed 18 months ago. So it's very rare. So there's less than 1 in a million in the world that have my syndrome, and there's only three of us in Australia. So,
Wow.
but I also have a spinal injury since I was 14. So I guess my passion also comes from is that I've been very fortunate where I've always had great support networks that have empowered me to do what I can do and have a voice. But I can see how hard it is, even though I have that. So I
Mm.
really am like passionate about letting people with disability have a voice and amplifying their voice.
Amazing, thank you. And look, we're obviously, Disability Housing Solutions. We're an SDA provider, and I thought when I was talking to Danielle about this, she shared with me that upwards of 90% of particularly females, but people with disability have suffered some sort of sexual abuse, and that I didn't know, and I was actually speechless for a moment, and we're stakeholders in the industry, and particularly in the built environment, we provide homes, and a lot of this abuse takes place in the home. And so, she was sharing with me about the national guidelines that you're a project officer on, and I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity for an SDA provider to get on the front foot and implement some guidelines across our houses and with our stakeholders who work in our houses, to enhance the safety of people that we take care of. So these guidelines, they're called, I've got them open in front of me, they're called National Guidelines for Workers to Create Social and Sexual Safety for and with People with Disability. Now, any set of guidelines you've ever read has a kind of a mouthful of a title like that. So can you maybe share with us where did this start from? A bit about maybe the journey to create the guidelines, who was involved, and how did you engage, and where you see these making like a meaningful impact at the grassroots.
Yep. So I'll just start with that statistic. So it is 70 to 90% of women with disability, primarily intellectual disability, will experience sexual assault in their lifetime, and 27% of that is limited to one episode. So we're looking at, even though there's 90%, but there's multiple episodes that's
Yeah.
happening, and 68% is prior to the age of 18. So it's a huge
Wow.
statistic out there. And with the guidelines that we developed with sexual health, family planning, ACT, so there was a team of us there. So that was Danielle and myself primarily on the team in terms of interviewing people. So what we did for the guidelines was we're very clear that the guidelines were going to be written from the voices of women and gender diverse people with disability, and it's not going to be like us sitting behind a desk writing what we think we know. So we were going out, and I was very clear that I wanted to go across the country, but I didn't want to go to metropolitan areas because people with disability are more likely to be able to have a voice and be able to speak to people about certain things. So we went to all regional and rural areas across Australia to interview people because they don't have a voice. So for example, when we're in Broome and we're in Derby, like they've never had those conversations. So it was really important. And also, interestingly, the responses were generally very similar. So it was across the board, across the country. And so we interviewed, it was up to 100 people across Australia. And that was all in a 4-month period. So we're very busy going across the country. And we had a national survey that we put out as well. And we also ran 2 big meetings or symposiums, so one in Canberra and one in Sydney. So over the course of that year, we had responses, or we had direct, meaningful conversations with 550 people, women and gender diverse people with disability. And we also developed an advisory group. So we currently have, which I'm still running once a month, we currently have 15 women and gender diverse people with disability on the advisory group, and we meet for 1.5 hours every month, and we discuss all the different issues, or they review any of the documents. So even when we were putting the guidelines together, they were still getting it, and they were still telling us what's wrong, what's not, what's right, etc. And the purpose of the guidelines is really to help workers know how to communicate with the people with disability that they're working with, and doing it in a way that it's not scary, and doing it in a way that, the worker's not just going to go, oh, this is just another policy I've got to look at, or I'm ticking a box, etc. Making it so it's meaningful, and making it so they know that it's actually going to make their job better and easier, and it's also going to make the relationship
It's such a good
better.
observation. Any time you're working with big organisations or government or something that's highly regulated, a lot of compliance, there's policy upon policy upon policy, And so it's really great that you've identified that there's potential for something like this to turn into another tick box exercise. And you've baked in at ground level to have it not be that. That's amazing.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did as part of the guidelines is we developed the iStart tool. So the iStart tool is a graphic that's in the guidelines, and it's just a 1-page or a 2-page, depending on how you print it out. And that really highlights the whole guidelines within that tool. So it can be used for the worker, but it can be used for the person with a disability as well. So they can then look at that and go, this is what I need from you. So I need you to make sure that you're giving me space and access and time, and you're really focusing on me and my needs, etc. So because often, even myself, I've found over the years, if I ever get help, whether it's medical help, particularly medical help, people are making decisions for me, and they're thinking they know best, which ultimately could harm me. And, not just physically, but mentally harm me, because then it makes you not want to actually access a service again. So that's the importance of the guidelines, is really trying to help the worker. And I acknowledge that if you're not used to working with people with disability, it can be quite confronting, because we're human. We often are confronted by things that are different, but it doesn't need to be, right? So, because ultimately you take away the person's disability, they're still just a person, and they're still you know, we all have our different needs and different wants, etc. So the guidelines we really are hoping that will help services like individual workers, but also organisations to just develop, you know, that cultural awareness and within the organisation of what to do to keep people with disability feeling safe. So it's all around social and sexual safety. But if someone's not feeling sexually safe, they're also not feeling socially safe. So it's a combination of the two. And socially safety is very much about, you know, if they don't feel safe in their own home because they've got workers coming in that they don't trust, or if they can't go outside, they can't catch a bus because they don't feel safe on transport, or, you know, they can't go to...
Sorry, Mel, I was just going to say, and it's, the discussion's bringing up a couple of examples for me where I can see the impact that sexual abuse has actually had on tenants that we've now got in SDA properties. And a lot of that has sort of happened in the past, but has formed part of the reason why an SDA property has been really important for them, because of, you know, trauma and the need to feel safe and the inability to do that in the housing type that they were in. And a lot of the effect of an instance of sexual abuse, or multiple over years, is a sense of disconnection to community, self-isolation, and that mental health impact where that person actually physically withdraws from their community because they don't feel safe anymore in it. And it is really interesting to hear you sort of say, look, these are the things that are really important for a person to feel safe. And what we often see is, unfortunately, the outcome of that, you know, that instance requiring that person to really change how they're living. And to be honest, I mean, we think SDA is great. So there's there's a positive that there is a solution in housing out there a lot of the time, but sometimes there's not. You know, and it's that isolation and that disconnection from community that then happens when somebody's feeling unsafe. That is just such a big hole and such a big problem.
Yeah, I completely agree. So prior to becoming a disability consultant with my own business, I worked for People with Disability Australia for 18 years. So I was very focused in the boarding houses across New South Wales. So there was 19 boarding houses that I was frequently visiting, to the point that I had a packed bag in my car because I could be in Redfern at work and get a phone call and they were telling me I needed to be in Orange that afternoon. So it was literally for 4 years I did that. Couldn't really do much more than that because it was quite tiring. But it really does highlight the importance of having a choice to be in an SDA, because an SDA, like the person with disability, gets a lot more choice and control over their own life and what they can do and who they have around, etc. But they also have money. That's a really big thing as well, which then means they can actually go out into the community and do things where people that are living in boarding houses and in group homes, majority of their money goes to the place. So therefore they're like, okay, I've got a place to live and, you know, a roof over their head. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard over the years where people are like, but they have a roof over their head, they should be happy, they should be grateful. And I'm like, would you be? Like, and I always like come back with like, you know, because I went to a lot of boarding houses, etc., and, you know, they're not particularly nice places, most of them. And I've often said I would rather be on the street than in one of those places. Like, the level of safety would it be safer for me on the street than being in
the level of safety in the boarding houses is always a part of the conversation. If somebody's coming from there, the reason they're moving out and seeking other accommodation is because of the lack of safety in those properties.
And the hard part is when someone's in a boarding house, they often can't leave because, you know, they physically and mentally are able to be able to live independently, but they can't save any money. So we all know if you're going into private rental, you have to have money for a bond, you have to have money to get a bed and a fridge and a washing machine, etc., even if it's just those basics. But you still need money for a bond, and
Yeah.
what landlord is going to accept somebody that hasn't had any
Yeah.
background and has no evidence of any money either? So that's where
Which is
it's been
which is
really
where the SDA
challenging.
funding is great, because like you said, once they get their plan approved, they come with money. They've got supports money. They've got allowances for great accommodation. Only 25% of their disability service pension is garnished for rent, so they've got the balance of 75% left. So look, these guidelines, Mel, if in the SDA context, so people who listen to this podcast, I've had feedback from people. They've been property owners, they've been SIL providers, there's other SDA providers, participants watch us. How would you like to see the guidelines that you help create implemented through the SDA marketplace?
I would like to see that people are actually looking at them, B, using them with the people that live in the SDAs, so having the conversation. So for example, like Lauren, if you were working in the SDA and I was living in there, like for us to have that conversation over the iStart tool, so I could tell you what I need using the iStart tool, and we can have those conversations and they can be documented and like worked through, etc. So I think that would be a really good thing to do. I think also in the guidelines there are a lot of case studies as well of like different areas and different examples or scenarios where the iStart tool can link to it. So to give a demonstration of how that actually works. So this guidelines that we have is version 1, and we're in the process of starting like different iterations of the guidelines that are more specific to particular areas. So for example, we're looking at doing the more SDA SIL area as well, so then it's really directed at that, but still using this the baseline concept. So I think having those conversations I think is really important, and I think even like if people aren't sure like what the guidelines is about, having like getting in contact with Say For Me, Say For You, and whether that means that we can do some sort of like webinar to do some sort of training.
I was going to ask that. So
it.
if I'm running a supports business and I'm working inside SIL houses and SDA houses, what kind of staff training do I need to look at for my people who are at the coalface?
In terms of the guidelines, I guess the staff training would be like if it was me running it, I would be putting like scenarios out to people and asking them how would they respond. Like
so once you've had a chance to look at the guidelines and go through it, right? Okay, and then so I'm looking at, because it's Lauren and I on the podcast, Mel, many times we've spoken about the pressures on supports providers these days. You've got top-down pressure from government trying to cut costs. You've got bottom-up pressure from the market, cost of living increases, wage increases, and the supports providers are being squeezed in the middle. They're trying to offer a service and make a profit. And then I'm acutely aware as a business owner of the cost of training our people. Now, training is something you must invest in. And there's a lot of training that we'd love to do, that we can't do all of it. So what kind of time liability do you think, if a supports organisation looked at these guidelines and said, yep, I want to adopt them in my organisation, and it's something that Disability Housing Solutions is doing, we're in the process of adopting these for DHS, right? So how would we break that down and encourage our support workers in our houses to, what kind of time investment would they need to train their people to get up to speed?
How long's a piece of string? But
that was a loaded question.
I completely understand the restraints and that are out there. So I would be like suggesting like a couple hours to go through it, and then a potential like follow up like later down the track, and making it more like an induction part of the process as well. Like I think that would be like really important, because I think also there's a lot of support workers out there that I know that don't last forever. all that long because they get burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's part of the guidelines as well, is to help the worker from not getting burnt out because they understand how to communicate and work with the client, because it's all about the communication. It's all about listening.
As a business owner, my efficiency radar just went off, Mel, right? So if I've got staff and I've got a high turnover of staff because they're burning out, and if I can introduce a set of guidelines that support their work with the people they're looking after to avoid that burnout, for me, my investment in that staff person, I just got a better rate of return from that staff person I've spent training. So if you're a business owner watching this, have a think of it from that perspective. And you also mentioned like webinars from Say For Me, Say For You. Is there some pre-recorded tools or webinars that people can access to as?
Currently not, but I'm sure I can, work with. So Sheridan Kerr is the director of the project. So she overall oversees the guidelines, and I work with it, but I overall look at all the people with disability. So I manage that side. So, but that would be something that we would absolutely be able to consider. But I think also just like thinking about, how you were just saying that, like the high turnover, like of people, is that often the reason that will also be is that if you have a worker, or say it's myself, and I have a worker that comes in and they're not listening to me, or they're not actually taking any notice of me, regardless of whether I have a disability or not, I know what respect looks like. I know what it feels like, and then I'm going to start having behaviours and I'm not going to respond to them. So then that's going to make the worker's life a lot harder, but they're going to think that I'm just got challenging behaviours, because that is such a big thing in the disability sector and world, is often a person with disability is viewed as having challenging behaviours.
They're quick to
but
be
I'm
labelled.
always like,
they're
being labelled. But challenging behaviours is a form of communication. So if you're not being listened to and you're not being heard, then you're going to exhibit behaviours. So I might have behaviours when I'm annoyed, but usually I'm annoyed because of something that's someone's doing, or they're not listening to me, or they're not responding to me. So I think that's really important. So if to acknowledge that, if the worker is listening to and working with the person with disability, then the person with disability isn't going to not respect the worker, it's going to actually respect the worker. And it's the same like with me. Like if I have a support worker and we're having those back and forth conversations and she's listening to me, but she's not agreeing with me, that's okay. We work through that. Or I mightn't agree with her. We work through that. But that's part of a respect, because you can't, because, it's also about that duty of care as well. So if I'm asking for something that's, going to put me at risk, then that's different. But you also got to be mindful that you can't put your own morals or ethics into that, because people with disabilities still have human rights. So you can still make
dignity of risk, with support work and activities that somebody's wanting to engage in, of course. What I'm hearing from you, Mel, is that this policy, or this sort of training document, if you will, is really about learning how to communicate, and how to communicate perhaps around challenging issues, or risk around sexuality or sexual behaviour. So from my perspective, and just seeing how, and I guess kind of working through it, how this can impact positively in the houses that we've got. We're property managers, so we have a lot to do with tenants coming in and settling in, and then ongoing sort of relationship with them throughout their tenancy. But we're not necessarily those people that are in front of tenants and having daily interaction with them. But for us, as part of that collaborative agreement that we have with a SIL provider in place, it might be that we can help encourage the SIL provider, or make it part of our requirement for any SIL provider operating in a house that we manage, that they actually utilise that document and have their staff agree to do that training. for me, having the separation between supports and housing is so beneficial, and this is one of those areas that we can help actually make that separation of services really help the participant keep the support team accountable for doing the right thing, having the right training, or they have a choice to not provide services in that house. So,
Absolutely.
you mentioned before that you're looking at version 2.0, particularly for different cohorts of I guess groups of people. That particular relationship there under an umbrella of a house that is managed by an SDA provider with a second party coming in to provide direct supports, that to me would be a fairly suitable, commercially viable and really beneficial link to making sure that person's got the tools to communicate about those risks that are present in the industry that having SDA housing was really meant to help with.
Mm-hmm.
So it's our I think our direct impact would be via the agreement with a SIL provider in getting them on board with this policy.
Yeah, and I think that's important because we know, like, under the NDIS, like, support workers don't necessarily need qualifications as such, which, like, some people think is good, some people think it's not, like, depending on who you speak to with disability across the country. But that's where the guidelines come in, because it's not a qualification as such, it's just like a framework for people to be able to work with. And so, like if I have a support worker with me and I'm having issues, she can bring out the iStart tool and we can talk through that. So it's a bit of a framework and a bit of a platform to be able to start those conversations, to have those conversations, to work through those conversations.
I can see guidelines. I can see this set of guidelines being incorporated into things like codes of conduct. So whilst you don't necessarily need formal qualifications, it's best if you do, but you don't need them. Providers should follow some sort of code of conduct about how to operate inside a house, and guidelines like this should form part of that code of conduct. Mel, who's adopted? So these were released. So version 1 released August 2024. Have you heard out in the world who's adopted these guidelines so far?
So we've had a few different places that have so far, but we're working with a couple big organisations such as People with Disability Australia to be able to adopt it across all of the disability across the country. So we're actually meeting up with them again next Tuesday. So part of that is really looking at how do we get it to the right people, because part of, I guess, we also want to make sure that people aren't just taking it and then not using it properly, or saying, as what happens, taking it, ticking a box saying, oh, I've got it, so I've done it, but not actually used it. So wanting to ensure that we're having those conversations as well, so that's really, really important. But when Danielle and I were really working on, when we were having all the conversations with people, one of the things, and I'm sure she told you too, David, that we were really, really like, we don't want to develop these guidelines and then the funding ends and then they just get stuck on the bookshelf. Because like, we put our hearts, our soul, sweat and tears into this document
for good reason
of the work that we were doing, and because it was co-designed, which is really important. But it also meant that it took a lot longer because there's back and forth, but every person that we interviewed was between like half an hour and 2 hours each person. So it was time, and then having to type everything up and then collate it so it goes into the guidelines. So there's a few different providers out there that are having conversations with us at the moment, but they're not, until they're clear on it, then they're putting it into
Mel,
practice.
everything that the way you speak and the way you talk about things and the setup you've done, I can tell you're a person who's been around the block. You've got experience. What's your current business? So you're doing your own thing
Yeah.
now. Give yourself a bit of a plug. What's your business and company? What do you do?
Yeah. So my business name is Sitting Low, Reaching High. So
Okay.
I came up with that because I'm in a wheelchair and I'm quite little, but I'm always trying to strive for up there. So that's how I came up with that name. And what I do, so obviously I work with Safer Me, Safer You, but I'm also working in different programs like Lifeline. So I deliver the DV alert training around domestic violence against women with disability across New South Wales and the ACT. So I do that, and then I'm also doing a project with Ability West, and that's around people with disability and fitness and wellness and what that means, like in terms of keeping your body fit in a way for your health, and also acknowledging a lot of people think that you have to have all the muscle in the world to be strong, but when it comes to disability, just being able to move and function in the way that they can is really important and really helpful, and it makes people feel better.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
doing that, and then I've worked on a few other different projects. So I work for the Disability Expos across the country, so I'm the MC for that, and also for the Workability Expo. So
Do you have a website that people can find you at?
Yep. So it is www.sittinglowreachinghigh.com.
.com. All right, great.
Yeah.
Mel, I think this has just been such a great chat. Again, talking to Danielle about this last year, and when she shared what she's up to, I'm like, I need to know more about this. And I'm just acutely aware that we've got hundreds of people that we accommodate every single night of the year. That we, at least in my world, we have a duty of care to do the best we can to make sure everyone's safe. And that's physical safety, that's safety from burglars, and that's sexual and social safety. It's keeping people safe that we accommodate. So these guidelines, I think they're really important. Thank you for the work you've done. I'm really interested in version 2.0 to see how it relates more to the built form and SILs and SDAs. That's going to be really cool. And just thank you for your time, and thank you for the work you've done. We're looking forward to keep in touch, and I'm particularly interested to... Yeah, you go.
So can I just add? So we're looking at version 2 being health first, the health sector, and then we're going on from that. But I just wanted to also say that we're going to have the guidelines in easy read as well. That's it's almost completed. So our fabulous Kate Barclay at Safer Me, Safer You is putting that all together. So which is really important. So if you have people with disability that have an intellectual disability or cognitive impairment or are from a culturally diverse background, they would still be able to access their guidelines. But also, their support worker might need to use it as well. So making sure that we're, just because they're a support worker doesn't mean that they don't have a disability themselves.
Right. Look, we're looking forward to staying in touch to look at some of these resources that we can share with our SILs to train staff up. So I think this kind of stuff, you're right, you've got to get it right. It can't be just a document that sits on the shelf and you tick a box to say just to satisfy an audit. It needs to be used. So thank you.
And if you want, people want to get resources about the different areas, if they go to the Safer Me, Safer You website, there's a resource tab link. There's lots of different information out there that's very much around social and sexual safety.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Mel, thank you. Lauren, thank you. Great chat, and we'll do it again maybe as the next versions come out.
Excellent.
No
Thank
worries.
you.
Thanks,
Lovely
Mel.
chat.
Lovely to meet you.
Bye.